Well, hello, everyone. I am so honored and humbled to be here hosting powerhouse speakers like Will Staney, CEO and founder of Proactive Talent, and Jasper Sohn, CPO and founder of Good Time. Before I jump into our amazing speakers and our awesome topic today, let me share a little bit about me. My name is Lauren Costella. I'm a change agent, communicator, and passionate leader for customer success. I currently serve as the head of customer success strategy for Good Time. And immediately prior, I was the vice president of customer success for Medrio. I serve as an advisor to the Success League and an original founding board member for the Customer Success Leadership Network. And I'm an active participant in the larger CS community and breaking into the TA community. For a little bit about Good Time is the first and only hiring experience solution that streamlines the candidate experience, enables smart scheduling, and scales inclusive hiring experiences that reflect your DE&I goals. Candidates love Good Time. Out of 27,000 candidates surveyed, they've rated us 4.9 stars. Now, enough about me because no one cares about me. Let's talk about today's topic. So first and foremost, today's talent market is highly competitive. I hear this from our customers all the time, and I'm sure you're experiencing it as well. Landing top candidates is harder than ever, especially in a remote first reality. You know, it's a candidate-driven market. The state of affairs are red hot. Candidates have more choice than ever due to COVID. COVID's also changed the way companies need to approach interviewing. There's no on-sites, or maybe there's a lot fewer than the status quo. There's pressure on companies to fill roles so that they can actually have impact to their bottom line. Man, you can't have slowdowns or blockers there. So the issues today, far reaching, but that's why we are talking with our experts like Will and Jasper today. We need to change the tactics, and we need to introduce new technology in order to shorten the time to hire and really make sure that we're developing our recruiting practices to reflect today's times. So in today's discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about how to increase your hiring velocity in your hiring process, how to save your company culture from a bad interview process. We know that that's pretty important as that comes in. How to effectively represent your employer brand, especially with the anywhere, work from anywhere phenomena. And then talk a little bit about tools and techniques the most successful companies are using to really acquire the best talent ever. So before we jump into these topic areas, I would love to make sure that our speakers have a chance to introduce themselves. So will you introduce yourself to our amazing audience here today?
Yeah, you got it. Hi, I'm Will Staney. I'm a founder and CEO at Proactive Talent, and as well as a co-founder of Talent Brand Alliance, which is a community for employer brand professionals. Prior to starting my firm, I led recruiting at Twilio, Glassdoor. Prior to that, built out the recruiting operations and employer brand at SAP and VMware. So I've been in this space for a while, really pushing innovation and speaking about what I do as well. So don't really hold any secrets. But what Proactive Talent does, we are the leading power partner, for your recruiting engine, whether that be from attracting, hiring, or retaining talent. And so we're a coalition of former TA leaders, former heads of employer branding that love helping companies solve this problem, whether that's helping you tighten your hiring gaps or bolster your retention rate or embolden your company mission with a strong EVP. We are really helping our customers get the cutting edge in this ever-changing recruiting industry. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much, Will. Amazing. And Jasper, can you share a little bit about yourself with this amazing audience here?
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Jasper, one of the co-founders of Good Time, and for the last 5.5 years, I've been very fortunate to work with some amazing companies like Dropbox, Airbnb, Zoom, to kind of change the way that people are thinking about hiring talent. And it's been incredible over the last few years how we've been able to not only help, but also examine from the data that's coming back out of here and provide insights back to the community, some of which we hope to share today. So really looking forward to digging into the conversations. And if you have any questions, you know where to reach us afterwards.
Oh my gosh, well, what a perfect setup. Thank you so much, Jasper and Will, for being here. Again, super excited. And I want to jump into actually the first topic. We have a lot of content, but as Jasper mentioned, everyone, if you have questions, please throw your questions out. We'll be answering them. We'll try to answer them throughout. And if they don't get answered throughout, we'll definitely open up for some Q&A at the end here. So the first area we really want to talk about is how to increase velocity in your hiring process. And this is a really big topic. And Jasper, I think I want to throw this out to you because we want to look at this from a data perspective first. So what are the trends that we're seeing in our data with regard to hiring velocity and what we're seeing?
Yeah, the thing that's quite amazing is we have a lot of data that comes not only before, but afterwards. So when you compare these two things to a world changing, event like a pandemic, it's quite interesting to see, over the last 5.3 million interviews, how people have changed and how companies have changed in response to that. But from the employer side of the house, there are twice as many jobs that are open, and a lot of them are remote than ever before. And so the market and appetite to hire people to help achieve your company's mission has grown, and it's doubled in size since before the pandemic. And interestingly enough, we haven't doubled the population of the world, so we're talking about twice as many job opportunities, but the same number of people. So when you're talking about competition heating up, we're talking about twice as hot as it was before. And on the flip side of things, from the candidate's perspective, today, they're actually faced with more choices than they ever have been before. And with, recruiting and talent acquisition becoming, a very conscious thing that companies are aware of, these candidates are now being, presented with opportunities even more than they've ever been before. And so we're seeing in our data that they're interviewing at up to 4 times as many companies as they did before COVID. And so that's, two things I think I'm just going to drop out on the table to begin with. And let's see where that conversation leads us.
Well, first and foremost, thank you, Jasper. And that's pretty incredible, these data-driven observations. So, Will, we discussed, as we were prepping for this, really amazing topic, recruiters haven't added more hours to their day. And in fact, you've experienced and seen like a lot of recruiters, they're spending more time on screenings. And certainly that's because there's double the job, or there's double of the hiring. Candidates are actually shopping around a lot more. So how do we actually solve this problem of velocity, which slows down, obviously, if there's more candidates, more job opportunities, and maybe not enough capacity to really handle that? What are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. It has been a whirlwind roller coaster of a year for recruiters, right? When the pandemic hit, hiring just like you were saying, Jasper, hiring just kind of stopped for 3 months. A lot of them got laid off, and then very quickly hiring picked up, not just back to normal, but twice what it was. And so companies had less recruiters and even more demand for talent. And so they're quickly trying to hire these recruiters back, some of them long gone in other companies. It's been just amazing. I've never seen a market like this in my career, and I've been doing this close to 15, 20 years. So one of the big ways that we've been helping our clients, and we're seeing companies fix the velocity issue, is really around automation, augmentation, and then really trying to shorten those interview timelines, right? Just like recruiters kind of got laid off, I think a lot of companies in the HR tech space were thinking that companies weren't going to be purchasing as much technology licenses anymore. That turned out to not be the case. In fact, these tech companies like Good Time, I'm sure you're experiencing, PS teams are strapped in trying to implement new technologies, and the type of technologies that they're really investing in are in AI and automation, and really I think that companies and these professional service teams are needing help to implement some of these new technologies and automation now, because it is feverishly coming back. But that tech infrastructure demand has now exploded, and even at our company, implementing new tech stacks and modern tech stacks is a big part of what we do. Our implementation services has tripled. I cannot hire enough people to do implementations right now. It's wild, but we love doing that work. But I think the market has realized that we have to invest in technology to do more with less right now and get humans doing the human work. So recruiters really working with hiring managers on candidate relationships, and working on candidate relationships as well, and really push people through this process and sell, right now because everyone is passive. Everyone has multiple offer situations going on. They can't be spending their time looking up at calendars or doing administrative tasks, right? And so that's really what I'm seeing, as well as other things. And then in augmenting, they don't have enough recruiters. So, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the companies are using a lot more of that future of work freelance model to augment their teams during periods of growth so they can just keep their heads above water.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point. And what you're talking about, this automation, augmentation, but also interviewer timelines. You shared a really interesting story, which I thought was a good one when we were originally preparing for this. Like, companies are actually trying to cut their processes, and is that true?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, not to mention, speed is so critical right now because, like you said, people are interviewing with as many as 4 different companies at a time and have multiple offers going on, right? So we are seeing our clients slashing their interview process and setting timelines that would seem almost impossible. I've got a client in food logistics and delivery that is they're setting time to offer at 3 days. And they're actually achieving it. They're proactively pipelining people. They're making decisions fast. They're getting interview teams capturing consistent data so that they can move really quickly to offer. And they're using technology to support that process, right? And these aren't just entry-level, high-volume retail roles. I'm seeing this at director-level corporate roles of companies realizing they need to move fast and quickly putting the team and resources in place to do it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point because we definitely see in our data that given the competition, you have to move fast or you're not going to capture those candidates, those really, really key candidates and be able to offer them offers, or they'll be accepting offers before you can even get them through your process. So really, really interesting. Now, Jasper, you had shared a little bit with me about in the velocity, you see some interesting trends in the data and perhaps on actually just the number of interviewers being a blocker as part of the bottleneck issue. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that aspect, which might be slowing down companies' velocity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Will was highlighting this, companies are figuring out how to shorten time to hire. And I think one of the biggest and most overlooked variables inside of your time to hire is actually the physical amount of free time your team has to do the interviews. And at a certain point, once you start making recruiting teams efficient, like that will no longer be the bottleneck. The rest of your team is going to start to become the bottleneck. And one of the big things that we saw is the number of trained interviewers. So you don't want to just throw anybody into these interviews. They should be well calibrated and have high quality conversations with candidates. But if you only have 1 or 2 of them, then guess what? If they are not free for an interview, you're not going to be able to close that candidate the same week. You're going to have to wait till the following week. And so when we're sifting through our data, the one key thing that we found out was the number of alternative interviewers actually has a really huge impact on your time to hire. In fact, one of our customers was trying to improve their engineering time to hire. They started out at 76 days. And when they noticed through our data, this bottleneck they were having with their trained interviewers, they decided to train up additional alternative interviewers. And with these alternatives, they were able to take that 76 days down to 36 days. And they were even doing this pre-COVID. And that's a huge, huge difference when you're talking about getting people at the table. And, if you forget anything today, the one number you should remember is the number 5. And that's what we discovered is the magic number of alternative interviewers that you need. If you do this, then 95% of the time when a candidate goes to find some time to meet with your team with 5 alternative interviewers that are well trained and calibrated, almost all of the available times that they pick will be free. 95% of the time they'll be free. And what that does is instead of waiting until next week to hold a really important interview, you might be able to hold that same interview tomorrow. And this is where the biggest gains that we've seen are happening inside of our system. And as more people take advantage of it, we're noticing that the speed to hire is starting to increase on all fronts. So yeah, kicking it back. I don't know, Will, if you've seen anything similar to that or if you have some thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, it really is being slashed, right? When velocity increases, you have to be more proactive and you have to do a lot of that pre-work to make sure that your hiring teams are all aligned, that you're really aligned on the role. Because to move quick, you can't be figuring out what the role is as you're hiring for it. You're going to waste your time. You're going to waste your recruiter's time. You're going to waste the candidate's time. It's not good. So it's like you have to really even further focus and hone in on exactly what's important to be able to make quick decisions. And I know we're going to go even deeper in that in a little bit, but I think what's really top of mind for TA leaders, I feel like folks, even in non-fast growth tech companies that I come in background, are feeling what it's like almost to be a startup TA leader. And for me, it's a frustration because when I was a TA leader, I really only had two options to scale my resources quickly. I had to either bring in, expensive agency recruiters, which still good for, niche roles or leadership roles. But I walked into a startup and they had 30 agencies working on all types of roles. Right. So my first job as a TA leader was to fire 30 agencies because it was just a waste of spend, and they were bifurcating the process, and we had no data on our hiring. We had no visibility. It was just resumes being slinged at hiring managers. Right. So that wasn't really how I wanted to scale my capabilities and my capacity and my velocity. Right. The other option was to hire more full-time recruiters, but you never know if that hiring demand is going to stay that way. I mean, we are one piece of legislation or not passing legislation away from being in another recession, right? So it's hard to make long-time decisions for short-term solutions, right? And so they're really looking for flexibility, right? But those were the options, right? And so that's why I started Practive Talent. We have more agile, flexible solutions, right? We're seeing more trends on-demand staff augmentation, really taking the RPO model and making it more agile and flexible, right? That you can do for flexible and fractional recruiting capacity changes, right? Whether that be through the on-demand contract recruiting sort of agile model that we do, or through like marketplace approaches, sort of like the Upwork model of recruiting, where you're kind of finding a bunch of recruiters all working on your rec just fractionally, right? They're starting to replace some of these legacy solutions. And it's awesome to see because not only are they faster, but they're way more cost effective, and the cost per hire is dramatically reduced.
Well, I really appreciate both of these perspectives, and it's awesome. And so we definitely need to improve our velocity, and there's no shortage in why. Their competition for talent is so fierce. There's 2 times as many jobs on the market. There's not 2 times as many employees, funny enough, how that works. Candidates are, interviewing at 4 times as many companies as pre-COVID. So really the solution comes down to, we definitely need more automation and augmentation. And what's really interesting is part of that automation and or augmentation, we have to think about the interviewers that are part of the process, which I hadn't really thought about before this. But it's really interesting that 5 being the magic number. It's a major component to speeding up that process. You have to work with your internal teams, get interviewers calibrated, so you have more time and availability to put these candidates through that process and hit those 3-day timelines that you were talking about, Will, which seem impossible. But I think between augmentation, training up of interviewers, and technology, you can totally get there. So I love it. This is really awesome.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, and trust. You have to trust your hiring managers to make quick decisions. You can't have it to where there's all these approvals to make an offer. You need to know. Yeah.
That's a very, very key point. I know we're going to get into a little bit of that trust factor, because I know a lot of people, especially on the customer side, when you hear about interviewers and wanting to train that, I know we've talked about stories of the CEO who wants to be in every interview. Definitely looking forward to kind of talking through some of those pieces as well. So I love it. I do want to, based on this, the hiring velocity, the need, those 3 days, that trust factor, this kind of really feeds into our next topic, which is really saving your company culture from a bad interview process. So we are trying to increase velocity, and hey, we're getting people through. But one of the things that I know as an employer, as a hiring manager, that I am really concerned about is, does that candidate have a really good experience, and do they really know our culture? What if we put people through and they have a bad experience? How are they going to talk about me on Glassdoor, or talk about the company itself? That's a really big concern. So with 2 times as many interviews happening, and some of these concerns around culture, Will, maybe we can start with you. How do you think about saving your company culture from a bad interview process, or like, just from experiencing that? Like, how do you think about it? What are the things and practices that companies should really consider?
Yeah, candidate experience is a keystone habit of great recruiting. If you have bad candidate experiences, it can be detrimental to your ability to hire in the future, and hurts your employer brand, right? On the same thing, when you have a great candidate experience, it can enhance that, right? And so when velocity increases, you have to be more proactive, like I was saying before, and do that pre-work before posting the jobs. Too many times I see companies in a rush to hire people, they quickly slam together a JD, get it posted, and hope the right candidates come in. And there's usually mixed match of what you need and what you're getting in, right? And so you have to really think through the skill sets, think through the interview team, right? Like if one of your goals is to have more diversity within your company and attract diverse candidates, you got to make sure that they're interviewing with diverse interviewers so they can get that perspective and ask those types of questions, right? Otherwise, they don't feel comfortable to do so, right? And so, usually this can become a disaster because you have to think about what is needed and who is calibrated to run these interviews, and then make sure that there's clarity on the role internally before you post a job. Otherwise, you end up wasting a lot of time because the hiring manager says 3 to 5 years of experience. You bring people in, and then they shortly as they interview a few people with 3 years experience, they go, actually, I need someone with 8 to 10. And the whole process starts all over again. You have to be very clear on what you need and train people up to do that.
I think that's a great perspective. Well, I love the idea of the pre-work. It's definitely a lot of work, but being someone on the hiring manager side, doing that pre-work is actually extremely helpful to just even make sure that we're all on the same page with what kind of folks that we need to join the team. So I love that.
Yeah, it's advice. Like sometimes you got to slow down to go fast, right? You got to slow down and really think it through so that you can go quickly. Yeah.
And that's a really tough thing when you're trying to scale. I know it. I've been at many a scaling company, many a startup. So that can be really tough. But even at larger organizations as well, just making sure you really understand those key factors. Now, Jasper, what's your perspective on making sure, like, what do companies really need to think about when it comes to their company culture and making sure that they save that culture from perhaps a poor interview process?
Yeah, I love all the comments before. Totally agree with those. Like, that preparation is really good. And I think the other area of preparation that's quite important is actually preparing your team to take these interviews. I think, as talent leaders, we're all obsessed with candidate experience and the company brand experience throughout the interview process. And, as much as, we have these great templates set up for emails to make sure they're worded just the right way and, wonderfully designed, like branding pages and stuff like that to help candidates ensure they're having great understanding of the company before they walk in. The fact of the matter is the majority of the interview process, where they spend the time, is actually with your interviewers. And so more so than all those magical emails and beautiful landing pages, the number one influencing factor on whether a candidate's going to take the offer or not is actually going to be the experience they had with your interviewers. And so I think this is an area that we've kind of relied heavily on the team to take up the burden of making sure that each and every interviewer is trained, that they run the interview in such a way that it best represents your company. But and a lot of times when you're scaling out really quickly in response to something like the pandemic, where you're having to hire really quickly, this is one of the areas that starts to suffer. And so making sure that you are having a system that is built to make sure that you replicate your best interviewers and make sure that the new team that's coming on is doing just as good or even a better job than your interviewers that have helped you bring on your talent, I think is incredibly important. And it only takes one untrained interviewer in the interview process to really turn a candidate off. And so I think that's like another area that I think is growing from the standpoint of awareness. Like people are understanding, hey, as we scale out our recruiting efforts, we need to also systematically scale out and automate our training efforts so that we can always provide the same great candidate experience that we hope that each of our candidates have.
This is a really important point. And Jasper, I think it's really interesting that you talked about the time that interviewers spend. it's so different than when we had on-sites, right? On-sites, you could have people experience the office or experience the culture. Now it's really about delivering that culture through the interviewing experience, which really heavily then relies on how your interviewers are delivering that experience. Will, to your point, how diverse is that interview experience? Those things are going to be pretty key, especially in this more remote first world, which is part of the phenomena we're seeing. Now, when we talk about really making sure that we train up interviewers well, Will, you had some interesting ways that companies have approached this in the companies that you work with. Maybe you can share with the audience, like, how can you ensure that you get quality interviews and quality interviewers?
Yeah, I think there's really two key things. One, replicate your great interviewers, right? What we're finding is, just like you're augmenting recruiters, we're having companies going to us and saying, look, we're hiring so quickly, we don't even have time to build a training program or process for these. We'll come in and design it and then do a train the trainer so that they're good for the long term, right? To help augment that. And we do everything from unconscious bias training to behavioral interview training and things like that. But really, I think the two things is that doppelganger effect, right? Find someone who's really good at interviewing and use this person to help train in other trainers, right? The other thing I've seen is sort of like a mini bar raisers program, like where companies really see interviewing as an extremely important role in the company, something that gives you prestige. I'm even seeing companies, for those who go through their interview training and get approved to be interviewers, getting special elite swag that only they get, like making it really a big, important job. Because what's the most important thing you can do as a company in this time? Hiring great people, right? And so, during these pushes too, you have to think about your capacity, right? So many times the big complaints that I get is like, oh my gosh, our engineers need to be building products, not interviewing other engineers. And it's like, yes, that's great, but then you need to build the capacity and what team you need to accommodate for that. If you've got a team of 50 engineers, but you need to be 100 next year, then you probably need to be 120 to have folks that can have more time and capacity without losing your product vision, right? And so, you really, during these pushes, you got a capacity plan for it, or dedicate specific people that really like it to doing that. And then, of course, like Josh was saying, have backups, lots of backups that are all trained and know how to do it. The other thing is the quality of interviewers is super, super important. Like each candidate, the qualities of the interviews themselves, right? So you have to be very consistent. Each candidate needs to be evaluated on the same points. That's what's going to help you make quick decisions. When you measure everyone the same, it just becomes a data-focused decision at that point, right? Even things that are intangible, like gut feeling, like that's a part of interviewing, right? Like sometimes you just have a gut feeling on somebody. A lot of the people on my leadership team that are amazing, I really hired on a gut feeling. But it's hard to measure gut feeling, right? Because everybody, only certain people are expressing it and some aren't, right? But you could put that as one of the things you're evaluating. Like, what was your gut feeling on this person? 1 through 5 stars, right? And look at everyone's gut feeling. If 3 out of 4 interviewers had a really strong gut feeling for someone, then you can say that should impact our decisioning, right? But if not, and you don't have data, it doesn't matter, right? So you can have this gut feeling aspect in your interviews, but separate it as a separate evaluation and data point.
I really love this. So what we've discussed right now is, in terms of culture, it's really important to take a step back and plan ahead. We need to make sure we have a solid process in place. We also need to make sure that people are well calibrated to run these interviews, and these interviews are based in data. And when we talk about, training people up, making sure that they're going through the right training, but even shadowing or having the ability to shadow those amazing, number one, like great interviewers, and being able to track that so we have more people. Again, what's that magic number? It's 5, right? 5 of those alternatives to make sure we have enough capacity on interviewing to ensure that velocity, right? So all of these things are so connected. We can't forget about one and focus on the other. So I really love this calibration topic. I love the idea of making sure that we take time to make time. So take some time to map out our process. Now, Jasper, I know you had some interesting insights on interview calibration and some of the best practices we've seen in customers. So how do they think about calibrating interviewers? How do they solve for some of these bottlenecks?
Yeah, I think that's calibration is, often a very important topic when discussed in the boardroom, and everyone knows it's important, but whenever the rubber hits the road and you actually have to operationalize this, I think that's where it becomes very, very difficult. And, before, when we were developing Good Time and one of our training products that's related to that, one of the things that we noticed was the manual effort to do this was incredibly intense, to make sure that people were, well calibrated, that they had the opportunity to shadow, and make sure that they were conducting the interview in the exact same way as their predecessors were, was such a manual process. And depending upon the availability of your talent team's time to defocus off of candidates and focus on this thing, really kind of change the level of success that you had at these opportunities. And we've seen lots of different implementations. For example, we've seen people do like shadow and reverse shadow programs. We've had, counterweight interviews. So like you have a new interviewer do the same interview at a later time than an existing interviewer, and then you compare those two things at the end. And really at the end of the day, the bottleneck is still the same. If you don't have well-calibrated interviewers, guess what? You're going to end up, as you scale out, feeling the pain even worse, because when your company grows and your need for your new teammates grows, you're not doing less interviews or the same. You're always going to be doing more. And if there's the same number of people today that are calibrated and able to do an interview, I guarantee you tomorrow, when the volume of interviews needs to double in time, they're not going to magically have twice the amount of time available to do these interviews. They're going to be exactly the same. And so the biggest trend that I've seen today is actually companies are aware of this much, much earlier. This is not the first scaling phase that we have, even though it's probably historically one of the largest scaling opportunities that most organizations have had. So people realize, man, if I'm going to be serious about, doubling or tripling the size of my team, or backfilling, thousands of people into a very critical role, or even at a smaller scale, going from 70 to 140 is like a common thing that we see early stage startups go through. That's not going to happen for free. You're going to have to invest the time. And I think the talent organizations have grown a lot wiser to this. So they're definitely putting in efforts much, much earlier. I think one of the favorite stories that I have to reference this is actually the exact opposite of that. We were working with one, unnamed company for right now, and maybe some of you guys in the audience can kind of nod or laugh about this, but they were at over 1,000 people, and the CEO was still interviewing everybody, from intern to director to VP. It didn't matter. They had to talk to everybody. And I think, this is definitely a side effect. It's not anyone's fault. It's a side effect of the fact that, they as a company were very successful and were growing quickly, but didn't know when was the right time to invest in kind of like what Will was saying, like a doppelganger program, a program to really help scale out and make sure that interviews are happening, at high quality. And I think at the baseline of all of it, it's just trust, right? If you have a system and that's operationalized and built to develop trust amongst interviewers as well as hiring managers and the rest of your organization, you can scale out effectively. And I think, if you're asking yourself, when should we be focused on this? I think today. If you haven't already started on it, as soon as possible, because it doesn't get easier to start it later. That same company, they eventually scaled off of that model, but man, it took a monumental effort for them to unwind, that many years of kind of habit that they developed in doing so. And once they did it, also the flow through rate of candidates dramatically increased. It was exponential. So yeah. I'll leave it at that.
I mean, it's really interesting because I know we had talked a little bit about in our session before this, that if a company, the chances of a candidate accepting an offer are around 50%, right? But if one other company offers before you, that drops to 25%, and so on and so forth. So that trust factor has got to be solved for. And it's really funny, Will, you brought up an interesting success rate, even the best companies when they try to solve for that.
Yeah, I mean, even the best companies are only going to get it right 70% of the time, right? Like they really are. And then I've come from the tech startup background, and here's the thing about CEO founders, right? If we don't feel confident that it's going to get done, we're gonna try to control it, right? It's natural for any ambitious type of person, man or woman, that's running a company. So recruiting has to build that confidence and build that capacity to where they can earn that trust, so that they can say, okay, I can step out and I trust that my team's gonna hire it the right way.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I mean, really the key takeaways here are, a poor interview experience can happen as a function of velocity, right? So one of the things that we know is interviews are happening over multiple days. There's multiple people involved. You don't get the on-site experience of all of the cultural aspects that come from having, this on-site. So what really it comes down to is we need a process and a plan for every interview. We need interviewers trained up, and we need them trained up to really understand your culture such that you'd be able to deliver this amazing candidate experience. And also, again, take into account the reason we need those plans, and we need to make sure people are trained. And remembering that 5 rule is so we can increase that velocity, because we can't afford to have candidates accept jobs elsewhere. So really, really important to think about that. Now, one of the things that always comes up as part of culture is also that just employer brand. This is a huge topic, and one that we really want to make sure that when we are representing our employers, or when interviewers are representing our employer, like, how do we do that from anywhere? I mean, we don't have the office, we don't have those pieces. So, Will, I think you mentioned in our conversation that this has been an extremely hot topic for a lot of companies.
Oh, it's huge. This is a lot of the discussions that we're having right now. It's budgeting season, and more companies are budgeting to build and put some real efforts around their employer brands than I've ever seen. Now, part of this is definitely stems from we're in probably the most candidate-driven market I've ever seen. But also, people are reevaluating after the pandemic their relationship with work. I'm constantly hearing from folks. I was talking to a guy who's a property manager. He talked to me. He's frustrated, and he goes, people just don't want to work anymore. And I'm quietly, in a very nice way, was kind of letting him know, actually, no, people just don't want to work for you anymore. What does your compensation look like? What's the experience of working there? They have a lot of options now. And so if you aren't a good employer, if people don't feel rewarded, attached to your mission, they're not going to take your job. They're not even going to interview with you, right? And so a lot, what we're seeing with so much competition, but also companies, having a real need to adjust to these times, it doesn't serve you to just promote your opportunities like a YARP, which is like yet another recruiting post. We're hiring. You really have to stand out. Candidates, are not just making decisions on moving up or making more money. They actually want to have a personal connection with the mission and vision of the company. They want fulfilling experiences that help them learn and grow. You can be maybe not the top paying company in the world, but if you offer great experiences, an alignment to a culture, make people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, you can beat some of the biggest brands for talent. You really can. And so many companies, though, right now, they haven't put that intentionality. Maybe they have values, maybe they have things like that, but they haven't really thought about what makes us specifically unique, right? When they're talking about working at their company, or you look at their career site or the Glassdoor and all that, they kind of sound like everyone else. They don't really stand out, and so what we work with companies to do is to really understand their positioning, understand their competitors' positioning, and help them create a game that only they can win, right? To really put out what's unique about them and the experience, right? And so these solutions for this is really, you got to be truly authentic, both the good, the bad, and the ugly about working for your company. And this acts as both an attraction of the right people who want to solve those types of problems for your organization, but a repellent for those that won't. And so you don't waste the time in the interview process, because they meet the hard skills and the comp with people who aren't going to be truly aligned and stay long-term with the company. I was at HR Tech last week. All the solutions there were all about employee retention. Everybody's dealing with attrition right now in ways that I haven't seen before, right? And so you want quality versus quantity, and when you better articulate what you are and the experience, you're going to attract just those right people. Good examples is last year we did a whole engagement and built out the EVP for Postmates. Their big thing is they really needed female engineers and really change their diversity. So we started showing that, right, and putting that out there, and we were able to increase their female applicants by 93%. So literally, we were able to show to the world that they're in at that moment. Like last year, Postmates went from a convenience brand, which is, hey, it sure is nice to get Wendy's delivered, at 11 o'clock at night when I need it, to literally being a company helping people get food who are immunocompromised, like food scarcity issues they're solving through their technology, right? So they were changing right there, and they were all remote too. And so what we did right in the middle of that engagement was we switched to just doing Zoom interviews with employees to get on the ground. What's their experience right now working in this hybrid world? We took those, we edited them into these just authentic, real stories and got out there. And that's really what attracted people in. And we highlighted the diversity within that as well. And I see a lot of people asking questions about with this 100 remote and what are we seeing? This is, you have to show it. Because if your career site still has people in offices, breathing on each other on a whiteboard all the time, and that's not the reality of what working at your company is like right now, you probably don't want to showcase that. Showcase what it's really like. And if you're in a hybrid model, show that as well. And so when we're doing employer brand videos, we're doing, we're showing one part is somebody in the office, another part is somebody at home, interacting with them, right? Like, because that's the reality, right?
I really love that. Now, Jasper, you also had a comment about diversity and what we're seeing in the data, at least from how to attract and show diversity throughout the interview process. Because as you mentioned at the beginning of this, that's where applicants and that's where candidates are actually seeing your diversity is really in that process, that 5 hours plus they spend with that they spend with the company as they're going through that process. Oh, you might be on mute, Jasper. Whoops.
Thank you for catching that.
No problem.
I pulled an old Zoom trick here. Stay muted and just smile. I think the topics that we're talking about here are quite important. Like from employer brand, which I think is kind of like your front door. It has to look awesome. If you're going to get people in the door. And then what you were talking about, Laura, in here is what I consider like the lobby. Your interviewers, who people meet with, is going to be a really good preview of what it's like to work at your organization. And so one of the things that we've noticed is, there's a very big discrepancy in what people want their interview experience to be like and what they actually have. And one of the big areas that we were studying over the last 2 years, especially with COVID hitting, was we wanted to see what are the impacts of COVID on people's hiring patterns. And the one that really stuck out to us was actually women. There was a huge indicator that we had done a correlation study. It showed that for every 1% increase in women on your team, in your interview team, you had a 2% increase in acceptance rates. So what does that mean? So like, let's say you have 30% women interviewers on your team, and your competitor has 40% women on their team. Well, they have a 20% more likelihood of closing a female candidate, the exact same female candidate than you do. And so this growth is very, very important. And I think, we're really lucky to work with some of, I would say, like the most forward-leaning companies when it comes to let's make sure that we build processes and, operations to where it supports our theories. And what we've been seeing actually inside of our cohort of customers is they've been steadily increasing about 4% year over year representation of women inside of the work, as well as the workforce, as well as the interview force. And right now, unfortunately, even though the world is half women and half men, females only represent about 37% of the interviewers out there. And if you combine that with what I was talking about earlier, that should seem quite alarming because if you want to make sure that you have even representation, you actually need to actively be trying to train up and recruit more people to do interviews for you that represent the underrepresented groups that you're trying to grow. And so industry leaders, I think, have targeted their organizations to be closer to the 50% mark. In fact, some of our customers have, just put their foot down and said, we're drawing the line here. Instead of a year, we're going to change this. And it's really cool to see how quickly, once an organization has access to this data and also can see how it affects their hiring trends, that they're willing to kind of make that change. And we've seen some pretty large organizations turn on a dime, and some of our best organizations are in the 40 to 50% range as far as women representation in their interview groups. And I think that's going to show, hugely in their numbers as they go and hire across the next year, and they're able to contribute to that many more hires that are in the same category. I think people will start taking notice and making changes that are necessary to kind of make sure that the future of hiring is not determined tomorrow. It's actually determined today in the habits that you've established and also the decisions you made in increasing the people who will be participating in interviews.
I love it. Oh my gosh. And so this importance of representing your employer brand and how you do that, I think, has been an incredibly insightful part of this discussion. And so some of the key takeaways is really pretty clear. You have to be authentically you. I think that just attracts and repels, as we would say, the right people. You've got to diversify your company and you're interviewing to represent that diversity. And Will, to your point, whether it's ping pong tables, happy hours, or in-office stuff, you really need to think about, is that what your culture is? Or is there more interactive? Is it hybrid? Is it remote? Really think about that, because that's your new brand these days. Now, with the very few minutes that we have left, and I could talk about these topics for days with you both because you're so engaging, I am curious to know a little bit about the tools and techniques that win talent at scale. And Will, you had some really interesting suggestions for what you've seen across your client base and how that looks.
Yeah, I'm really seeing a lot of the use cases for AI and automation, in the right places where things are typically at the front end of the funnel, where there's a lot of repetitive info gathering or scheduling, right? Like chatbots, candidate questions, interview scheduling, matching candidates, at least a high level of who you should reach out to first in some of these AI focused things, as well as using AI to match people maybe you already have within your company that could fill those roles first before you go external. Talk about quick hiring. That's a way to do it. The other thing is in posting and letting candidates know about your position. We have programmatic technology, and the adoption within recruiting is actually pretty low. Only 10% of companies are actually using a pay for performance model to market their jobs, right? If you think about programmatic, essentially, the old way was you'd spend these big individual contracts with each publisher, like LinkedIn and Indeed and Glassdoor, and you put that budget in essentially you're putting all these eggs in a few baskets, right? But now we have programmatic technology that is a pay for performance approach, where you have a lot more agility in your budget. You can just say, look, based on our hiring that we need to do, we have about a $250,000 budget or $100,000 to invest in advertising. Let the AI decide where that should go, because they have so much better ways of looking at that aggregate information than humans do. And they can test things, and you can set stop goals where once this role hits 50 roles, stop spending on it, or I only want to pay when I get an application, right? This really creates so much efficiency, and so you can really spend your recruitment marketing budget more, a lot smarter and more efficiently. And so that's a simple, quick solution that can save tons of money and get the right quality candidates in. And the other one is that staff augmentation overall. Companies are trying to hire employer brand leaders with 5 to 10 years of experience, but employer branding really as a skill set and as a career has only really been around for 10 years. So, I mean, there are very few of these people, right? And that's why we augment that. We essentially give companies a head of employer branding and some great, creatives to start telling their story, then train the team internally, help them hire somebody, and then pass it over, right? So building that initial machine, I can tell you as somebody who's done it as a solo talent brander in a large, company with thousands of employees, it took me 2 years to do what we've been able to help companies do in 6 months, right? And so you've got to build the internal engine and stop outsourcing and really make sure it's your employees and it's your own people, right? What we kind of explained about this, it really affects the interview process as well. If your employees are all saying different things about your culture and your employer brand, candidates can get really confused and figure out, well, they don't really know what they are. But when you really take the time to research and figure out what's unique about you, what happens is we start to kind of create a song, and then we're teaching all your employees in interviews the melody and how to sing that song. And then we're all going to market with something that's true and that other people are going to hear. It's sort of like your vibe attracts your tribe. Other people will hear that and they go, oh my God, that's the kind of place I want to be. And you'll organically be a magnet for the type of talent that are going to stay with you longer, be more enthusiastic about your mission, and do things that you really need to do. And then the last is personality assessments, right? We're remote.
Yeah.
Right? We're remote. So remote interviewing, and it's missing, right? You feel like you can't get team personality fit, but you've got predictive index to where you can really find and make sure that there's differences in work styles, assessments, to think about the culture of the team, especially now when we can't always be in person as often. It can be a little bit more data-focused approach to having diverse teams that really complement and work well together.
Oh, I love it. And Jasper, maybe I can get your perspective really quickly. And then I know we have a couple of questions that have come in, so I definitely want to try to see if we can answer those succinctly as well. But Jasper, what are your perspective about technology or tools that folks are using to help solve some of these bigger problems? You're also on mute. Shoot.
I need to stop doing this. To stay very conscious of the times that we're in right now. I think one of the biggest shifts in technology that I've seen is how do you interview when you're remote, right? The playing field has kind of changed. You don't get that nice in-office candidate experience that you used to have. And so, 3 to 4 years ago, whenever you would ask a talent leader, hey, could you do a full leadership interview completely remote, they would laugh at you and say that's impossible. You need to have them on site, and it's a very different discussion today. In fact, I think the biggest requests that we get in are really focused around like, hey, how can we make sure that as a remote candidate, first, these candidates can have access to easily meeting with our team. And one of the biggest trends we've seen is interviews are not happening on the same day anymore. They're like spread out across the week. They're very strategically placed during lunch hours, or maybe just right after hours, or just before work. The other thing that we see exploding in general, not just in our talent sector or in our technology sector, but others, is it's the use of AI, but not to replace human beings, to augment them. At the end of the day, as much as the world is changing, talent is still about people, and people, when interacting with others, feel at home and feel recognized and feel affinity. And so we're noticing and seeing this trend of AI being on the back end, not on the front end. Like, it's not the raging face of the technology that you're using, but it's doing things smart in the back that help kind of manage and do the administrative work, but don't take out the human element in the conversations that are happening. So augmentation has been a huge trend that we're seeing altogether. And then, kind of wrapping it all up, we are in a world where there's not one software to rule them all anymore. It's, there are a lot of different best of breed softwares, and those best of breed softwares working well together has, I think, helped these teams establish what, they call their HR tech stack, right? Or their talent tech stack. And being able to work well with other softwares, I think, is a huge trend that I think talent leaders are continuously looking to dig into. And it's something very exciting, as a tech partner ourselves to be involved in. So we're also really excited. We had a lot of conversations about making sure you had well calibrated interviewers, but interviewer training has been one of our number one focuses, because as we mentioned earlier, the number of employees or potential employees in the world is not doubling or tripling over a period of time. So you really have the same number of people to work with. You need to make sure every single one of your interviews that you're having is an opportunity to best brand your business and to really represent and give this candidate an opportunity to see the best in your business. And so, we've been focusing hard on interview training, and really exciting. We're releasing a second version that focuses on just that, making sure that you have well-calibrated interviewers who have the opportunity to be doppelgangers of best interviewers inside of your organization.
Well, thank you all so much. So it sounds like we need AI and automation, staff augmentation, and certainly platforms that share back that key data. Like, are we hitting that 5 to 95% in terms of interviewer training? Are we hitting those diversification goals? All of these things are super, super great. I did want to get to Abby's question. With today's competitive market, I think, Will, you might be well positioned to answer this or at least give a stab. Mm-hmm. With today's competitive market and knowing candidates are interviewing elsewhere, how long do you feel it's appropriate to be given an offer that expires?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. And it really depends on the type of role, the type of company. And then, I guess I would ask the question back is that if you gave a candidate 3 days to make a decision and they told you that they needed 5, would you say, no, we're going to pull the offer after 3 days in this market? I don't think so. I don't think you will, right? I think people need time to think about this and they have a lot more offers than before. So I think, to me, the best way to really figure out what's going to make sense is to be completely transparent. Both, at least when I'm a recruiter, I like to tell candidates where they stack up and how many more candidates that we are evaluating and how maybe competitive this is for this role, right? And I ask in return that they share with me, like, how many interview processes are you in, right? Where's the offers and what's the timeline, so that I know I can make sure that our interview process at least has a chance to get that in there so that we can set a reasonable amount of time to expect a decision, right? And so to me, that's just core recruiting job in gut. You can set SLAs around this. I typically give candidates 3 to 5 days if we've gone all the way through the process and I already know that they have other offers in hand too, to really think it through. Maybe over a weekend sometimes if we're really quick to do it. But that's a hard one to say definitively because it really depends on a lot of factors. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Will. We have one more question. And if you're interested in learning more, please definitely click on the demo Good Time. We would absolutely love to show you a little bit more about Good Time, or if you'd like to be connected to Proactive Talent, we are happy to make those connections as well. The last question we have is 100% remote or hybrid working models. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. This is from Katie. Sorry. Some companies offer 100% remote or hybrid working models, which is attractive to candidates. Are there statistics that show these hires are more likely to be made due to that flexibility? Now, Jasper or Will, I'm not sure if we have the data that backs this up, but just curious your perspective on that.
Yeah, I can maybe share a data point. I don't think we have a slide for it, but definitely have seen this data point. So we've been observing like where people are getting hired. And before COVID, there was a huge on-location hiring trend that you could see by like literally on a map on a globe. You could see the hub cities. These are the big cities that hire people on location, were the primary locations for people to not only accept jobs, but to relocate to. Post-COVID, there has been a rapid expansion. Almost twice as many people are moving to non-hub cities, and we're seeing this like massive expansion into cities that just never used to light up on the map as far as like popular places for people to work. Places like small cities in Virginia or rural cities throughout the United States. And this just goes to show, this is taken from our data, but at least from the customers that we have, there's a huge trend and a push towards remote opportunities. It doesn't mean that every job is going to be remote, but the ones that have the ability to do so, it looks like companies are taking full advantage of this and expanding their area of reach, which they can find talent. It's one of those things, not only finding talent in these new areas, but we're noticing the great migration. In fact, San Francisco used to be the top city to hire engineers from. It no longer is. It was toppled by New York, which used to be farther down on the list, but it looks like people are just moving to whatever city they please. And if they're able to, they're taking remote opportunities. And so, whether this is a macro trend overall, or it's just a temporal trend that we have here, I don't think it's going to change very quickly.
Well, thank you for that really amazing insight. And Will, Jasper, thank you both for joining me today and talking through these really huge TA trends. And thank you to the audience. We really appreciate your participation, your questions. Again, if you want to learn more about Good Time, please feel free to click on the demo. We're happy to chat with you. We're also happy to put you in touch with Proactive Talent if those are some of the things that you need. But otherwise, we just hope you learned something today. I know I did. Thank you so much again for attending, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.